technology in this type of video conference. Then what we'll do is do a brief introduction of the members of the committee so we all know who we are. And then we'll have a staff presentation, and the staff will provide an overview of the initial regulatory review of the Cook Inlet Salmon FMP. During that staff presentation, it'll be appropriate for committee members to ask questions of the staff. Maria will explain how to do that, and I will call on you at an appropriate stopping point during the presentation so that you can get any clarifying questions you have out. Then when that's done, we'll take oral public testimony, and that'll largely conclude our meeting. So that's the game plan for today. My name is Andy Mesereau, and we'll go around and do introductions once Maria gets done giving a quick tutorial on the technology that we're using for this video conference. Maria?
Okay,
thanks.
I'm going to hide you guys quickly and open up the share pod here. So some of you, this might be your first time, and each of these windows is called a pod, and so that's kind of how we refer to them. And at any time, if you are having problems connecting or need some technical assistance, feel free to email mpfmc.admin@noaa.gov, and our admin staff it's constantly monitored, so feel free to do that. We'll respond in the chat box too. We can help give you a little bit more immediate help. For those of you who are joining with webcam, there's the webcam icon at the top, and where's my little, there it is. Only the members are going to be on webcam, and you go through some of these steps to start sharing your webcam, and that's at certain times during the meeting. If you'll notice the attendee pod on the right-hand side, was there a question, or let's see, I think I'm going to mute somebody. Try and keep your phones on mute. That's the easiest way to do it, is on your actual phone, not through the computer or anything like that. It's a lot more responsive. The attendee pod will show, actually, see this little phone at the top? It'll show that I'm speaking. So on this active speakers area, you can see who's speaking. And there's two hosts right now. You can collapse this menu, and you'll be able to see who is participating on this line. The chair and members are O1 and O2s are the executive directors in this case. You can change your name. We've done that, but if you are joined as a member of the public, you can change your name by just clicking on the right-hand corner. It gives you a couple of options. Up here's how to access that menu. Raising your hand, we might do this process here. There's an icon up at the top which allows you to raise your hand to be called on for discussion. A little icon next to your name will show that you have your hand raised, and it will go in order. I think we practiced this already, and people are pretty familiar with doing that. Don't feel bad if you hang up or accidentally get hung up on, or need to take another call. Go ahead and just reconnect using the phone icon and have it call you back the service. It's usually pretty quick when there's not a high volume of people trying to do it all at once. We do have in-meeting public testimony, like David said, on our e-agenda. We need to update these slides, but you can sign up for public testimony. You click on the green link that will allow you to, again, upload, sign up. You sign up what agenda item you want to sign up for, name, organization, email. Tell them that you're not a robot, and then you can attach your document. And I put the link in the chat box so you can go directly to our e-agenda. And as we proceed through our meeting, you'll be able to see who is signed up on the meeting and who has some attachments that they want to show. Everybody can follow along with their own attachments on their own device. And when they testify, we will cross their names off. So I I know that there's a couple of people that wanted to testify for this meeting, so again, if you're having problems with that feature, go ahead and email the NPFMC staff or respond in the chat menu and we can help you. Keep yourself on mute. These are some tips. You can, if you're concerned about being muted, you can mute yourself through your computers too. Sometimes there may be a lag time. It depends on what you have going on in your house, what other items are taking up space with your bandwidth. And that's why we use the phone. The audio is a lot more stable through a phone connection. And if you're having problems seeing the layout or the screen with some charts and graphs, use this button in the top corner of this pod, and it will full screen that that presentation for you. We also have the presentations posted on our e-agenda, so if you had the ability to open up on a different screen, you could do that as well. And that's all I had. If there's any questions, I will put you guys back on webcam.
All right, thank you, Maria. That was helpful, I think. If any of the committee members get hung up and can't remember how to get their hand raised or any other issue, just go ahead and contact the staff at the link down in the chat box, and they can help you through that. We want to make sure you get your questions answered today, you have some understanding. I neglected to mention at the beginning that there's no action that's going to come from this, right? We're seeking input from the Board of Fisheries members, and this will give you a orientation. We can get some input, and where the point we're at in the process is we completed the initial regulatory review in October, and we're taking final action in December. So not only can you make comments now, but you can also provide written comments later if you want to review this and think about it and see what's best for you. There's ample opportunity to get your input, and we welcome that just because you're more connected to the state fisheries, and we do mostly federal, so I think your input is really valuable to help us make an informed decision. Let me just go down through the committee so we all know who we are. We can just go down the list of participants that are committee members. I can start. My name is Andy Mesereau. I live in Seward, Alaska. I have a guided sport fishing business, and I'm an IFQ shareholder. I've served on the North Pacific Fishery Management Council for 6 years now, and yeah, I'm the chairman of this committee and a couple other ones, and that's where I'm at. Cora?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Cora Campbell. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I've been a member of the council a couple times. This is my first meeting as a member of the Joint Protocol Committee. I'm a lifelong Alaskan, mostly a commercial fisherman, now employed by Silver Bay Seafoods, which is a salmon processing company.
Thanks, Cora. Kenny?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I'm Kenny Down. I'm on the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council. I'm an industry representative on the council from Washington State. I live in Seattle. I've worked as a commercial fisherman in Alaska. I've run a few fishing companies and a trade organization, mostly on the fixed gear side with hook and line and pot fishermen. And I'm glad to be here and try to see what we can do to help the Board of Fish today.
Thanks, Kenny. Marit?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marit Carlson Van Dort. I'm the chair of the Alaska Board of Fisheries. This is my first Joint Protocol meeting as well, and my second year on the Board of Fisheries. Originally from Juneau and Chignik Bay, Alaska, I spent about 15 years in the commercial salmon fishing industry in Southwest Alaska. I hung up my boots a while ago, but remain very interested in fisheries issues and look forward to the discussion here today. I might also add that I live in Anchorage now, but I'm a lifelong coastal Alaskan. Thanks.
Thanks, Maura. Mackenzie?
Hello, thank you. My name is Mackenzie Mitchell. I'm a new appointee to the Board of Fish. I have a background as a sport fishing guide here in Alaska. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska. Studied resource economics at the university and continue to teach economics now at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. This will be my first joint protocol meeting, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Glenn Haight here as Executive Director of the Alaska Board of Fisheries. Appreciate the council for helping put this on. Committee member John Jensen sends regrets he's going to be absent today. He wishes he could be here, but I just want to pass it on to the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. I suspect he's familiar with this issue, but we'll miss him nonetheless. David?
Dave Witherell, I'm the Executive Director of the Council, and I'll work with Glenn to write up a summary of this meeting to provide to the Council.
Great. Thanks, Dave. That's who we have today. I think the game plan now is to receive a staff presentation from, I believe, Doug Duncan. It might take a minute to get it spooled up. Let's just stand by and give Doug a chance to explain this to us.
Hello, everybody. My name is Doug Duncan, National Marine Fisheries Service, Alaska Region. First, I guess, mic check. Can everybody hear me all right?
Yep, we have you fine.
Perfect. And it looks like my presentation is coming up as well. Okay, looks good. And now I have my control of my presentation. I'll begin starting with a couple notes. First off, like many of the other folks here, on my first joint protocol committee meeting, so looking forward to going through it and sharing some hopefully useful information. Today's presentation, just to give a brief summary to begin with, I'll be talking about some of the background of the Cook Inlet Salmon FMP amendment, then taking the bulk of the presentation to do a walkthrough of the management alternatives under consideration, and as well as looking at the analysis of impacts of those alternatives so far. The presentation will conclude by looking at kind of the next steps and what we're looking at coming down the line for this action. Before I begin, I'll also, throughout this presentation, you'll see section numbers and page numbers on some of the slides. These refer back to the initial review draft of the analysis posted on the October council meeting agenda. I believe staff may have also linked it to this joint protocol meeting agenda. So if you, in addition to asking questions, that's a great resource to refer back to and look at, and if there's, certainly answer any questions folks have, but that's another way to get more into the weeds with this. Beginning with a brief statement of what this action is. It is amending the federal salmon FMP as well as federal regulations to include the Upper Cook Inlet EEZ commercial drift gillnet salmon fishery into, and that is the drift gillnet fishery that occurs in the federal waters of Cook Inlet. I have the area highlighted in red on this figure to give people a description of the action area. And then there's some kind of helpful background to considering this action. I'll start with the general federal management approach to salmon in the EEZ off Alaska. So the salmon FMP divides management of salmon in the EEZ into two major areas. seen on the map there on the left side of the screen. That is the east area and the west area. And in the west area, which includes Cook Inlet, Cook Inlet, there is a general prohibition on commercial salmon fishing in the EEZ. However, there are 3 exceptions for traditional net fishing areas, which are excluded from the Salmon FMP and federal management. And this has the effect of deferring management to the state of Alaska. So this management approach has most recently clarified and codified under Amendment 12 to the Salmon FMP, which additionally had some updates to ensure compliance with the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And in addition to that Cook Inlet traditional net fishing areas, there are 2 other portions of the EEZ that were also designated as traditional net fishing areas. And this was Prince William Sound and the South Alaska Peninsula. In 2013, there was a lawsuit challenging this treatment of the traditional net fishing areas brought by the United Cook Inlet Drift Gillnet Association. And after several years in appeals, in 2016, the Ninth Circuit Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, holding that these areas needed to be included in the federal Salmon FMP with all appropriate conservation and management measures. And to begin addressing this, the council initiated action in 2017. And then the most recent step, and at least as far as the associated litigation is concerned, the court ordered, in response to a motion to enforce judgment, the court ordered the council to complete final action on this agenda item by December 31st, 2020. Hence the December action that Andy referenced in his introduction. So the council, again, has been working on this since 2017, both through the conventional analytical process, 3 discussion papers that are all available on the council website to track the development of this action, and then also the history is summarized in the October, the most current version of the analysis. In addition to this part of the process, the council also formed a stakeholder committee with the call going out in 2017, and the committee formed and began their work in 2018. And the purpose of the committee was to develop recommendations on management measures for this FMP, and they concluded their work in May 2020 and presented their final recommendations to the council at their preliminary review of this action item in June 2020. And we'll talk be talking a little bit more about those recommendations specifically later in the presentation. Most recently, the council considered this action at the October 2020 meeting, initial review, which leaves only final action in December remaining. The council, the purpose and need for this action is here. They intend to amend the Salmon FMP to manage the traditional net fishing area that occurs in the federal waters of Cook Inlet to meet all the MSA requirements and bring it into compliance consistent with the Ninth Circuit's ruling. So this is a point to be very clear. This action that we're considering is only applicable to Cook Inlet and the commercial fishery that occurs there. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the alternatives, and then we'll spend some time walking through each one in detail. So the first alternative under consideration is a no action alternative, which would make no amendment to the Salmon FMP, leaving things under the status quo. The second alternative under consideration would be federal management of the Cook Inlet EEZ with specific management measures delegated to the state of Alaska. So this would be a management arrangement that is conceptually similar to both the crab FMP and the scallop FMP, where the state does much of the on-the-ground management of the fisheries, and the council and NIMP serve more in the review and oversight capacity. Alternative 3 would also assume federal management of the Cook Inlet EEZ, however, without any delegation of management authority to the state of Alaska. So under this alternative, commercial fishing in the Cook Inlet EEZ would continue to occur, but it would be managed directly by National Marine Fisheries Service and the council. And then finally, the new alternative 4, which was added by the council at the end of the October meeting, would also assume federal management of the Cook Inlet EEZ, except that it would close this portion of the EEZ to commercial salmon fishing. That's a kind of a quick overview, and now we will walk through each alternative in more detail. And I'll try and certainly don't hesitate to ask questions, and I'll try and pause at natural stopping points to make any needed clarifications. We'll begin with alternative 1, which is the no action alternative, status quo. Under this management option, no changes would be made to management of the fishery or the federal FMP. This is not legally tenable given the Ninth Circuit's decision. However, the National Environmental Policy Act requires that we analyze a no action alternative. So there's a baseline for analytical comparison. I'm going to jump ahead next to alternative 4, just because it's also relatively simple. Alternative 4 would be federal management of the Cook Inlet EEZ with it closed to commercial salmon fishing. So this would, like I mentioned, apply the more general West Area prohibition on commercial salmon fishing to the Cook Inlet EEZ. Commercial salmon fishing would continue to occur outside of the EEZ, and by that I mean inside of state of Alaska waters. And in these fisheries, these state waters fisheries, of course, there would be no additional federal involvement in them through the council process or otherwise. Is that an interjection for a question, or should I continue?
Continue, Doug. If we have a question, somebody will use the hand raise feature, and I'll jump in.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to consideration of alternatives 2 and 3. And these are the 2 action alternatives that would maintain a commercial salmon fishery in the Cook Inlet EEZ. I am going to begin by grouping them together just because I'm looking at what the 2 alternatives share in common, just because there are a number of common elements. And then we'll move on to looking at each alternative separately in order to highlight the differences. So under federal management of the Cook Inlet EEZ, there's a lot of Magnuson-Stevens Act requirements that need to be satisfied in order for a fishery to occur there. A lot of these are included in the common elements and require an annual council process. So there would be a council under both alternatives 2 and 3. There would be a council salmon plan team formed that would prepare an annual stock assessment or safe stock assessment and fishery evaluation for the fishery. There would also be an annual status determination criteria process through the council to determine annually whether overfishing was occurring in the fishery or whether it was in an overfished condition. And the federal, and then there would also be another requirement is the setting of annual catch limits, and that is ensuring that a level of catch occurs that does not result in overfishing. And one thing that I want to mention about kind of the annual catch limits and the status determination criteria Given the jurisdiction of the council and NIMS being limited to EEZ waters, the annual catch limits would be specific to the fishery and the EEZ. However, the status of the stock would be assessed, factoring in all both state and federal removals. However, the NIMS and the council could only limit or change what removals occurred in the EEZ. Another common element of both of these action alternatives is that they're dependent on state data, coordination, and cooperation. It's generally recognized that the state of Alaska and the Alaska Department of Fish and Game has an existing management infrastructure expertise and data. So under either, obviously, of course, under the delegated management regime, they would be playing a significant role, but also they would provide some substantial data inputs with two NIMPs so that they could manage the Cook Inlet EEZ under Alternative 3. So under Alternative 2, which again is management of the Cook Inlet EEZ salmon fishery, delegated to the state of Alaska. Can everybody hear me? I think I just had a connection failure.
I hear you, Doug.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Continue. Say Alternative 2, delegated management, similar to the crab and scallop FMPs. Under this alternative, in-season management of the fishery would be conducted by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. There would be, like I mentioned, status determination criteria and annual catch limits set each year. These would be set pre-season to inform management measures, but would not be binding in season, and they would be evaluated post-season to determine whether overfishing occurred or the stock was in an overfished condition. Analysis of comparing the application of these federal annual catch limits to state management using escapement goals found that they were consistent with each other. So we'd expect that the state would continue to use their escapement-based management under Alternative 2, as long as it continued to be consistent with the status determination criteria. There would be, through the annual council process and in the appeals process, there would be oversight and federal oversight and review of state management action in the Cook Inlet EEZ. Again, this is applicable only to the EEZ and not the fishery that occurs in state waters. Measures delegated the designation of fishing seasons, closed waters, management areas, legal gear, and record keeping and reporting requirements. Moving on to Alternative 3, which would be federal management of the EEZ without delegation to the state of Alaska. Under this alternative, it would be a National Marine Fisheries Service doing in-season management for the fishery in the EEZ. And one of the significant differences between this and Alternative 2 is that because of the federal noticing requirements and our flexibilities to manage under the federal process, having some more intensive requirements, an annual harvest limit or a total allowable catch would need to be set pre-season based on the forecasted salmon abundances. So we'd have to set our management numbers pre-season and then close the EEZ to commercial fishing when that TAC was reached or would be exceeded by another opening of the fishery. Again, we have the status determination criteria and annual catch limits, which is similar, nearly identical to as under Alternative 2, and these would be evaluated post-season to determine the status of the stock. And our management of the EEZ or harvest in the EEZ would be reduced in the event that harvests of salmon in state waters increased. We would have to be responsive to state management of the salmon fisheries in order to avoid harvest levels that could trigger a conservation concern. And
excuse me, Doug, we have a question from Marit. Is this a point where we might be able to get that out?
Yeah, I'll just conclude with that under Alternative 3, the state would continue to set escapement goals for state waters. And I'll pause for questions.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is just a clarification. I'm assuming that these tax and the annual catch limits would be assigned or developed for each salmon species of interest in the Cook Inlet?
Yes, that's correct. It depends on whether it would be direct or through the use of an indicator stock, or in times where there's not escapement data available, using historical catch to determine those, or to help set those.
Thank you.
Okay, carry on, Doug.
Okay, continuing on with Alternative 3, federal management. This is going to require a lot of pre-season agreements and coordination with the state in order to have a fishery each year. I think that, like I mentioned, the TAC, the total allowable catch for federal waters, would have to be set depending on what management was occurring in state waters. So each year we need to look at what the expected removals were in state waters fisheries to determine what would be a harvestable surplus that could be taken in the EEZ. Another potential annual management outcome under Alternative 3 could be a closure of the EEZ to commercial fishing. So no fishing at all during the year, which could result from several different concerns. If in the event that there is a conservation concern and harvest of a stock would exacerbate that, the EEZ can be closed to commercial fishing. In the event that we don't have timely data inputs from the state, such as what their expected removals or forecasts for salmon runs in a given year, so i.e. not having the data we need to manage the fishery, that would result in the closure of the EEZ for a given year. Another possibility is if there is a no harvestable surplus after accounting for projected state salmon removals in a given year. Or it's probably similarly, if the TAC that we have to work with would be too small to support a directed fishery, it would likely be that the EEZ would be closed in a given year. And then I think one of the other important management measures that might be is probably good to point out in this venue is that with this federally managed fishery in the EEZ, ensuring that those we're able to manage to that TAC precisely and ensure that only vessels registered for participation in federal waters are fishing. One of the anticipated management measures is that the EEZ fishery would not be open at the same time as the adjacent state waters drift gillnet fishery. So there would be an off-cycle openings to allow more coordinated management of the federal fishery. In addition to talk about some additional more on the water management measures that are required under each alternative. Under Alternative 2, there's some federal record keeping, monitoring, and reporting measures that we need for management of the fishery and to satisfy our MSA requirements. we would require that participants in the EEZ have a federal fisheries permit to allow for the implementation of some of these measures. We would also require that participants have a simplified paper logbook. One of the important things to note, both from a practical perspective and an analytical perspective, is that the EEZ boundary in Cook Inlet has never been particularly important with respect to management of the fisheries there. However, once included in the FMP, we would need to be able to much more precisely determine what the removals that were occurring in the EEZ compared to what removals were occurring within state waters. Additionally, we also have an obligation under National Standard 9 to document any bycatch of groundfish and other species. So this would also be recorded in the federal logbook, along with catch by stat area, including whether those fish were harvested in the EEZ or state waters. And then finally, to ensure that data availability to the council and NIMS, we would also require that all harvests are reported through fish tickets or e-landings, which I don't think is much different than existing conditions. And then, so moving to alternative 3, it's essentially the same. However, there would be the additional requirement of a vessel monitoring system. So to ensure that participants in the EEZ were fishing only in the EEZ, so we could precisely manage to that total allowable catch. We couldn't have a situation monitor ensure that vessels weren't harvesting both in state and federal waters. And the ability to use fish tickets under alternative 3 is also not available. All fish harvested under alternative 3 would need to be reported through the e-landing system. Just moving on to an infographic to try and take another viewpoint at alternative 2 and 3 and break down the elements of each process. Items specific to alternative 3 have a little asterisk. Pre-season under alternative 2, delegated management, there's not a lot that would change except for the setting of the pre-season ACL through the council process. And again, under alternative 2, this is not binding, however, would provide information to set annual management measures off of. Under alternative 3, again, we have the addition of this pre-season harvest limit for federal waters, the total allowable catch. Under alternative 3, that would be set pre-season. And then obviously the coordination to ensure that the respective state waters fishing periods and federal waters fishing periods were not occurring or scheduled to occur at the same time. Moving on to the in-season portion of the annual fishery cycle. Under alternative 2, this looks substantially similar to existing conditions. The state would continue to monitor harvest and escapements and adjust the open areas and times to control harvest consistent with the statement goals. Under alternative 3, National Marine Fisheries Service would be doing this in the EEZ, where we would monitor harvest until we approach that total allowable catch and then close the fishery. Finally, post-season, under both alternatives, we would evaluate the annual catch limits and the status determination criteria to see if they had been exceeded or whether there's any overfishing occurring or an overfish status was observed. It's closely associated with the annual catch limits are also accountability measures. So these are management actions that would be taken in the event that an annual catch limit was exceeded. So this would be for salmon fishing reductions and slightly more conservative management in future years. and then the salmon plan team, in addition to working through the ACLs and SDCs, would prepare the stock assessment and fishery evaluation. Coming to the closing slide of the alternatives, I've attempted to put up a table that characterizes the major elements and what I felt might be particularly relevant to the Joint Protocol Committee. First off, whether or not there's an annual council process. This occurs under both alternatives 2 and 3, like I've talked about. However, certainly there's not an annual council process with respect to Cookin under existing conditions, and there would not be, again, if the Cookin, the EEZ was closed to commercial fishing. I pause for a hand.
Yeah, thank you. This is Mackenzie Mitchell. I just had a clarification question on the alternatives of 2 and 3. And in the postseason, I guess when you review for overfishing, and if overfishing does occur, how do the responses differ to overfishing with each alternative 2 and 3?
Thank you for the question. So under alternative 2, delegated management, the state would have an opportunity to implement a corrective management plan. And if that was sufficient to address any of the conservation concerns, then that would be the end of that. If not, the council could choose to take action to limit harvest in the EEZ. And under alternative 3, it would be NIMS taking action, and I believe the council also establishing a plan to alleviate the overfishing or overfish condition.
Thank you.
And continuing on, just noting the entity responsible for in-season management under each alternative. For alternative 2, that would be the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Alternative 3, NIMS. And alternative 4, not applicable, obviously. For catch apportionment between the EEZ and state waters, right now this is handled by the Board of Fisheries. It would continue to be handled by the Board of Fisheries under alternative 2, but subject to any specific criteria in the MSA or FMP. And then under alternative 3, NIMS would manage the EEZ based on what agreements with the state and what was left over after projected state removals. Under all alternatives, except alternative 4, obviously, where commercial fishing can't occur, a CFEC permit would still be required, even under alternative 3, and that's because it is a requirement to land fish within state waters. And we don't expect anybody would harvest in the EEZ without arriving in the state or contacting the state, such that it would be bound by their regulations. And then whether or not, and then the final line, fishing across the EEZ boundary. So by this I mean whether or not a vessel could fish both in the EEZ and state waters within the same trip, kind of as it occurs in the fishery now. We would expect this to continue under alternative 2, given that the logbook data would give us what we need to determine catches both in federal waters and state waters. However, under alternative 3, we look to offset openings of the state waters fishery and the federal fishery. There would be no mixed fishing trips that could span both the EEZ and state waters harvest. And this is just because we have that TAC that is we need to not exceed, and we need to have accurate in-season management data to accommodate that. Moving on to, so I guess maybe this is before I continue, this is kind of the end of providing the description of the alternatives. So I'll maybe pause momentarily if there are any other questions at this time before moving on to talk a little bit more about the stakeholder committee recommendations and then look briefly at the analysis of impacts.
Doesn't look like there's any takers. Doug?
Sounds good. We'll continue moving along then. So, like I mentioned previously, there's the stakeholder committee, the Cook Inlet Salmon Committee, convened by the council to provide recommendations to the council on what they would like to see for management measures under the amended FMP. These recommendations were finalized at the June 2020 and presented to the council. The council is speaking to the committee recommendations very generally. They would like to see expanded federal jurisdiction and involvement in Cook Inlet salmon management, including the application of federal management to all salmon fisheries in both state and EEZ waters. The council chose not to incorporate these into the alternatives considered, however asked that a review of these recommendations be provided in the analysis. So in the October initial review draft of the analysis, there's a section 2.6 on page 100 goes into greater detail the recommendations and then the rationale for not including them. So the next part of the analysis that I'll briefly summarize is the environmental assessment that determines if there's significant impacts expected to the affected environment. I've listed the environmental components that we evaluated, Alaska salmon stocks, ESA listed salmon stocks. Of course, there's none in Alaska, but they do enter Alaskan waters, marine mammals, seabirds, and habitat. And at this point of the analysis, there are no significant impacts expected to any of these resource components. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section of the presentation, which is getting into the expected impacts of the alternatives. First off, beginning with alternative 1, the no action alternative. Obviously, if we don't change anything, we don't expect that anything would change. There would be state management of UCI salmon fisheries would not be modified in either state or federal waters. Harvest levels would continue to fluctuate just simply due to natural variability in salmon, likely within previously observed ranges. That's pretty straightforward. Moving into the impacts of alternative 2, I spent a lot of time talking about the application of annual catch limits, and mentioned that the proposed that existing state salmon management were consistent with the proposed annual catch limits, and if this continued, if no annual catch limits were exceeded, no stocks were overfished or overfishing, then we would expect salmon harvest to remain pretty much very similar to what they are under existing management of the stocks. In the event that an ACL was exceeded or overfishing was occurred, the state would have an opportunity to take management action to correct this. If they either didn't or this was insufficient, the council might take additional management action. However, this would only be applicable to, again, the commercial salmon fishery that occurs in the EEZ. Under alternative 3, again, we have those annual ACLs that would be set. However, more significantly, we would have also the preseason total allowable catch that would be set for each species or stock. Since these would be established based on a forecast, they would be conservative just to account for the increased uncertainty, as well as the lack of management flexibility inherent to the federal process. And by that, I mean it takes National Marine Fisheries Service longer to publish a notice in the Federal Register to close a fishery than it does for the state of Alaska. Through emergency orders can make things happen very quickly, whereas we don't have that flexibility quite as much. Once the attack was reached, the EEZ would be closed. Given that it's a mixed stock fishery, it would be difficult for us to, it's likely that once the PAC was reached for a given species, that all commercial salmon fishing would have to stop in the EEZ. I also mentioned the other annual outcomes that might lead to a more general closure of the EEZ under Alternative 3. In the event that there was an existing conservation concern and that no harvest was supportable, or that we did not have the data or the data in time to conduct our management of the fishery and avoid exceeding our catch limits. And so under Alternative 3, due to these challenges, we would expect lower harvest levels by the EEZ drift gillnet fleet on average. So I will point out that with these, this could provide additional harvest opportunity in state waters, salmon fisheries. So if there were siltfish surplus to escapement, these could continue to be harvested in state waters under Alternative 3. Finally, we have the newly introduced Alternative 4. Given that was the council requested analysis of that only beginning in October. The revised analysis has not been prepared and posted. We do expect that to come next week. So that will be posted on the council agenda for the December meeting. That will not speak to it in this presentation. I thought as generally the analysis of impacts, looking forward to the timeline for action and implementation. We have the court-ordered deadline of December 2020 for the council to take final action. And then as a part of the existing terms of the lawsuit, NIMS has 1 year from when the council takes final action to complete secretarial review of the FMP amendment. And then if NIMS does approve the proposed FMP amendment, the final rule implementing it, as well as the associated regulations, would be published by December 2021. 30 days after the publication of the final rule occurs, we would expect the regulations to be effective. So at the end of the road, we anticipate that the 2022 fishing season would operate under the revised FMP amendment and regulations, regardless of which alternative is selected. With that, I'd like to give a thank you for all the work group members who've contributed to this analysis, and some of which are available here to help answer any questions that the Joint Protocol Committee has. Thank you, and happy to address any questions that people have.
Thanks, Doug. I do have a question. For the purpose of the public and the Board of Fish members, you stated in the presentation that the final review document is going to be available on the council website in approximately a week. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it is actually scheduled to be posted on the 9th, so Monday.
Okay, great. So people can review that document and kind of get a better idea of the decision points that the council will be considering then. Thank you.
Yes, that will be available for the public to review, as well as council members and anybody else prior to the December council meeting.
Any other questions about the presentation or the Salmon FMP at this point? All right, I don't think there are any more. Thanks, Doug. That was a really helpful presentation. I'm sure everybody appreciated it. I think the next phase of this committee meeting is going to be to receive comments from the public. Let me start my webcam real quick here. Okay, so as far as the public comments go, what do we have, Dave? How many people are signed up?
I'll have
I think we have 6 signed up. At least when I checked a little bit earlier, it was 6. The public comment section of this will be the same as what we do for public comments. When we receive them at the council, it'll be 3 minutes for individuals, 6 minutes for organizations. I believe we put a timer on the screen so we can keep track of that, and I'll inform you if you go over, just so you can have some comments to wrap up if you go over your allotted time. We do want to hear from all of you, and I do appreciate the fact that everybody took time out of the middle of their afternoon to come here and provide us with public comments. Oftentimes, the most critical part of the decision-making process for the council is to hear what the public's saying. So with that said, I think we can begin. I believe the first person up is John McCombs. John, are you on here?
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you just fine, John. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I just want to get a few things on the record here. My name is John McCombs. I'm the president of Cook Inlet Fishermen's Fund. I'm speaking for myself today, and we had 2 million sockeye escapement in the Kenai, when the biggest returns in history come from escapements of 450 to 650,000. When I started fishing, the average sockeye weighed 8 pounds, and now the average sockeye weighs 4.8 pounds. Permits reached a high of 250,000 here at one time, and now they're down to 20,000. And I would remind you of the language in Magnuson-Stevens Act that states unequivocally the entire range, not just the EEC as you've laid out in all your proposals. The Magnuson-Stevens Act language also says to preserve the character of coastal communities, which it seems to me is kind of an ultimate failure in these plans. Fishermen are licensed by the state and restricted by the state out of compliance for 30 years with Magnuson-Stevens Act, and we've been in litigation for 12 years now, and it sounds like we're going to be out of compliance for 2 more years. And you didn't mention in your alternative 4, which we don't get to respond to today because it's not on here, that you don't mention any timeline for an appeal, which I'm sure there will be. The council has conceived 4 non-compliant machinations to further harm and cheat fishermen. 2020 is a sterling example of failed management. Do we trust a commissioner who dictates every opening from his ivory tower in Anchorage? No. Thank you for this opportunity today to speak.
Thank you, Mr. McCombs. Any questions for Mr. McCombs from the committee. Okay, thank you for your time.
Sure.
Sure we'll hear from you again in December. We'll see you then. I appreciate it.
Damn right.
Next up is Steve Vanek.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. My name is Steve Vanek. I've drifted in the inlet before limited entry even went into effect. I'm a board member of Cook Inlet Fishermen's Fund, but I'm representing myself. I will speak about the pink salmon. In 2020, while commercial fishermen sat idle this summer, 10 to 20 million pink salmon went unharvested in Cook Inlet, and this wasted resource is now rotting in our rivers and streams. The commercial catch of pink salmon was only 343,000 fish. This is once again a fishery disaster caused by the state of Alaska's salmon management policies and practices that do not meet the requirements of MSA and the national standards. I have fished in Cook Inlet for over 55 years. In some years, pink salmon have made a poor season into one that is a survival season, but not in the last 30 years. The 2020 pink salmon economic disaster occurred due to the state's decision to deny a pink salmon fishery. 2020 did not need to be such an economic disaster for Upper Cook Inlet fishermen. Poor and biased management led by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game's Commissioner Doug Vincent Lang once again allowed wasteful underharvest of pink salmon. Management by local on-the-scene biologists, which the state of Alaska touts, is the biggest lie perpetuated on the public and on the world. It is criminal, in my opinion, for the council to have let the state of Alaska manage this fisherman for the last 30 years without a FMP or any federal oversight. Now the council comes up with FMP alternatives that do not comply with Magnuson or the Ninth Circuit Court. Like the presidential elections right now, it is back to the courts. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Vanek. Appreciate it.
Yep.
And we'll hear from you again in December. Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Next up, Dyer Van Devere.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, Dyer Van Devere. I've been a commercial fisherman in Cook Inlet for 50 years now. I got to say, this is probably the worst managed fishery year that I have ever seen in my entire life. With all the over-escaping in the Kenai and the Kasilof, and the lack of being able to harvest pinks and chums that we've been harvesting on for years and years, and I can't believe that part of the thing that's on the table here is to close the fishery down in the middle of the inlet. This kind of seems appalling to me, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any questions from the committee members? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Next up, we got Roland Maw.
Just moving the phone around. You got me?
Got you fine, Roland. Go ahead.
Council members, members of the Board of Fish. I'll start with some general comments. Just the last day that the drift fleet was in Area 1 was July 13th. The last day that the drift fleet was in the expanded corridors was August 14th. On the 17th of August, we removed, the fishery was moved to the west side. The final escapement of sockeyes, late run sockeyes into the Kenai River is 1.4 million, 114,000. Some other general comments come out of the 2020 Upper Cook Inlet Commercial Salmon Fishery Season Summary that just came out yesterday, and I would hope that that would be made available by the department to all parties. If not, I would ask that it be entered into the record. On page 2 of that document, there's some interesting. In 2020, the peak day of the sockeye salmon passage in the Kenai River occurred on August the 17th, with a count of 134,000, almost 135,000 fish. This was the highest daily sockeye salmon passage recorded in August all time. And note that that occurred on August the 17th, just after the corridors in Area 1 had already been closed to us for a month. The other comment out of the postseason summary is that the 61% of the late-run sockeye salmon in Kenai River, 61% arrived in August. And that is just 1 month later than it was 10, 15 years ago. And the management plans simply have not kept pace with what these fish are doing. The next comment would be on page 5. On July 16th, there were 237 vessels that harvested roughly 43,000 sockeye. The importance of that is 237 vessels. 10 years ago, that number would have been closer to 500. So less than half the vessels participated in the fishery, even though they were fully licensed, ready, and willing to go. There was just no reason to go out there and lose money. And then the last one is that the chum salmon, and Dyer, I think, spoke to that. Anyway, specific comments are, UCETA takes the legal position that all salmon must be managed as a fishery. Everyone now can see the disastrous economic consequences of the 2020 state management. State-oriented policies are regularly ignored and violated. The Sustainable Salmon Fisheries Policy, Escapement Goal Policy, New and Developing Fishery Policy, and Limited Act and its provisions. The state ignores federal acts, policies, and procedures in the Upper Cook Inlet fishery. The legally required analysis are deficient, ignored, or missing completely from this FMP that's in front of us. For example, I'm reading off of my submission, surplus escapement impacts, differential economic impacts on fishermen between communities, effects on the national food security, multiplier effects, economic and biological analysis of the state implementing these plans, the economic and food security issues that result from the state and how they're allocating these stocks or not. I'll just skip down. When we talk about doing SAFE reports and FDC reports, with the current tier system, you have 3 tiers. For example, the pinks are in tier 3. There's no analysis, there's no assessment, there's no escapement goals. So I don't know how you're going to do a postseason analysis that's required when you don't have the basic data in front of you, and I don't see any plans to acquire that data. The alternative 4, the timing of alternative 4 makes a mockery of the public process. After the last public testimony at the council meeting, number 4 was put on the table. This is the first chance we have to comment on that, but guess what? That won't be out until next week, so we're put in a very awkward position of asking for public testimony, but we have nothing from the council or the staff upon which to make those comments. This was never before the Salmon Committee. It's not sufficient time to do the required analysis. I think it's just way too late to even be seriously considered. The last one is, how is anyone going to control the use of the Commissioner's EO authority to do what was done in 2020? There was no general lack of fish. There was a lack of harvest. Notwithstanding an FMP, state management plans, the Commissioner or administration makes decisions that played out in 2020. How is that going to be handled in the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming today, and I'm sure we'll hear from you again, and look forward to your comments once we get the analysis. Any questions? Not seeing any. We can move on to the next testifier, which is Eric Hughes-Besh. Sorry if I ruined your last name. Go ahead, Eric.
Yes, hi, my name is Eric Hibbs. I'm the Vice President of UCEDA, and I submitted a document last May to the council. On May 18th, we submitted a 30-page document to the council, and I wanted to bring it to your attention here today because while the council members have seen it, some of the Board of Fish members have not. And I think it's an important document, and it directly plays into determining status determination criteria and escapement goals and in-season management practices. In that document, we make the case and clearly detail it that there is not a single stock of salmon that enters Cook Inlet that is managed in a way that meets the requirements of federal law. There's no escapement goals that are currently in place in Cook Inlet that meet the requirements of federal law. The management plans don't. The in-season management practices don't either. So I think in the range of alternatives that are discussed in this FMP process, I think alternative 2 is going to eventually be the most appropriate, but not as currently written. It's going to require additional change to comply with the federal requirements. And if you take a look at the paper that I submitted, you'll begin to understand why those changes are necessary. And this is going to require both action by both the Board of Fisheries and the Department of Fish and Game to work with stakeholders and make the changes necessary to comply with federal law so that then the fishery can be delegated to the state to manage. So I don't think alternative 4 is workable at all. I look at it as just a punitive measure by the state because the state doesn't want to make the changes necessary to comply with federal law and manage this fishery that's been in existence for over 100 years. And I think it's alternative 4 is just a punitive action by the state, and I would urge you to not give it any further consideration. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. Mara, question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The testifier referenced a document that he had submitted. I was just wondering if you could tell us the title of that document.
It's a letter addressed to the council from the United Cook Inlet Drift Association, dated May 18th, 2020.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Eric. We'll look forward to hearing from you again here in a few weeks.
Andy, there are a couple of hands up there. I don't know if they've already been asked.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a second. I got to get my buttons right. Mackenzie, do you have a question for Eric?
I just wanted to know if, as a new board member, I could get access to that document from May 18th.
Yes, you can. I think Dave can tell you where it's posted on the council website, but I think it's readily available there. If you go back to the October meeting to the public comments on the Salmon FMP, that would be my guess where you'd find that document.
Okay.
And I could send a link to you through Glenn if you'd like.
That'd be fine too. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Kenny. I just noting that Jim Armstrong did put a note there that it is posted on this agenda under our e-agenda, the document that was being asked about.
Okay, great. Oh, we have one more testifier. That's Matt Hackinson. Matt, are you on here?
Yeah, hi. My name is Matt Hawkinson. I'm the fleet manager for Pacific Star Seafoods. We're a subsidiary of E&E Foods, which is based in Seattle, an American company, and PacStar operates out of Kenai. We're the biggest buyer of Upper Cook Inlet salmon by market share, and we have about 50%, a little less than 50% of the drift fleet, those fishing in the EEZ. So we have a vested interest in this fishery, and we need to have reliable management and predictable management. The problem that has led to this lawsuit is, well, it's pretty well spelled out in option 1, the status quo. And we'd all like to see a resolution to this. Nobody wants an appeal or another lawsuit or to see this drag on. And the reason that this became a lawsuit was because we didn't have efficient harvest. So speaking as a fleet manager, I have access to harvest numbers, what each boat got, how much they made. I can tell you that the bottom 13% of our drifters caught less than 1,000 pounds. And that was all species of sockeye, all species of salmon, not just sockeye. And the average price for that was less than $1. So the bottom 13% made less than $1,000 for a 50-day season. So the problem is efficient harvest. If we look at option 4, we can see the results of that in the 2020 fishery. With the February Board of Fisheries meeting for Upper Cook Inlet, they changed the management plan to close the EEZ in August. It had already been closed for the second half of July. And this resulted in an over-escapement of the newly increased escapement goals in the Kenai and Kasilof rivers. So the drift fleet wasn't able to efficiently harvest these. It's hardly worth the money to go out there, and they end up with more fish in the rivers. I'm sure you're all familiar with the problems with over-escapement, that the river system can't support this excess of fish as they rear in the lakes for 2.5 years for most of the sockeye. So some of the problems, it's really hard to decouple the state area waters from the federal waters. And looking at the items discussed here by the report, status of the stock. talk about an overfished condition. We have two fisheries that happen in river, which have an annual bag limit. So we have a dip net fishery, personal use fishery, that has an average of 55 fish per permit and tens of thousands of participants. And then we have an upriver sport fishery where they're snagging sockeye above the sonar, and both of those fisheries catch in excess of 500,000 sockeye regularly. So if we're going to try to keep the commercial fleet from over-harvesting based on state data, while those fisheries are able to grow, there's no limit to the number of participants. There's no change to the bag limit, no reduction in the bag limit in the dip net fishery. Occasionally they do in the sport fishery. But we could have over-harvest on that side, and it would prevent the commercial side from fishing. I believe that, you know, if you look at the best runs, the best harvest, the drift fleet was fishing 2 days a week in the EEZ, and I think that's a good starting point. There are several impacts about closing the EEZ. One would be impact to state data, the test boat, the offshore test fish index. They make sets in the EEZ. And also, I think that this year was a real good example of what happens there. Because they were closed in August, we had this over-escapement, and that could have been prevented if we had fished a regular schedule of Monday, Thursday openings, inlet-wide, for those 2 weeks in August, from the 1st through the 15th. For this fishery to continue, we need to be able to harvest fish effectively and efficiently. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback there.
Oh, we can't hear it on our
economically viable. I'd like to just reference a couple comments from this February meeting. One of the board members stated on the record that the management of the fisheries ebbs and flows based on the makeup of the board and the governor who appoints them. I don't think that this political ebb and flow is conducive to a good business. As you can see, the businesses that have gone under and left the area. And also he stated that he was recommending MSR, maximum sustainable recruitment, to cram as many fish in the rivers as you can, with the idea that when he's sport fishing in the river, his yield increases when there are more fish in the river. I think that's rather short-sighted because of the lack of return. If you over-escape the river and the fish can't survive and they can't grow as big, and also the detriment to the commercial fishery. If they aren't allowed to harvest those fish just so that a few in the river can harvest more successfully, we all need to have that success rate when we're allowed to go out and fish where the fish are, when the fish are there. And that was the point of this lawsuit, and I think we'd all like to see a good resolution to that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt. It's good to hear your perspective. Any questions for Matt from the committee? Okay, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it. Okay, that concludes our public comments. I would encourage you to go back and look at the October meeting and look at the more complete written comments there too. I think you get a pretty good idea, you know, if you want more information about this item that we're working on. I think there's, you know, looking at the public comments and then reviewing the document, it really is helpful to kind of see how they fit in. That's certainly what I try to do when I'm trying to weigh all of this. So that would be my advice if you want a deeper dive at this between now and December. Mr. Witherall, do we have anything else on our agenda?
No, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering if you want to take a short stand down and let the Board of Fish members collect their thoughts before, maybe they want to make a couple of statements for the council to consider before we break or adjourn.
Yeah, sure. Let's take a break for 10 minutes. and we'll come back. And if you have any final comments or questions for us, we can resume then at 2:40. Let's take a break, and we'll come back at 2:40.
Thank you.
Writing's not that easy, but Grammarly can help. This sentence is grammatically correct, but it's wordy and hard to read. It undermines the writer's message, and the word choice is bland. Grammarly's cutting-edge technology helps you craft compelling, understandable writing that makes an impact on your reader. Much better. Are you ready to give it a try? Installation is simple and free. Visit Grammarly.
now before we break? Oh. That's weird. Okay. Anyway, mute your microphone if you're not
Come on.
talking.
Or my
That'll
ear.
work better. So what I'd like to do is we'd like to get some feedback from the Board of Fish on this agenda item. But with that said, this was a brief presentation. It's obviously a complicated and somewhat contentious issue. And so I would give the Board of Fish members the opportunity to comment on this now, or if you feel like you want more time to study the issue, review more public comments, and provide us some feedback prior to the December meeting, either of them are acceptable. I don't know that it's reasonable to put you on the spot now and expect you to, give us your full impression, but we do want to hear from the Board of Fisheries about this, members of the Board of Fish. So this will be your first opportunity, and if you feel like you want to fill in the blanks or you feel like you haven't had enough time to really think about this, then that's fine too. We can get it from you another time, but it's helpful on an issue like this that has a direct, interaction with the state management of the salmon fishery to hear from the Board of Fish as well. I see that Mackenzie has her hand up. Let's hear from her first.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I guess, I'll take some time to review and prior to the December meeting, but right now I just had a question, and it's sort of more for clarification, so Doug Duncan might be the one to answer this one, but just to have a concise understanding of how and to what level the state's involvement changes in Alternative 2 from its past participation. I can see from the PowerPoint that, obviously a forecast of salmon runs and submitting those for federal review was one of them, but if he could just elaborate on that.
I don't see Doug listed on the participant list anymore. Let me see if I can get him.
I don't think you're going to be able to. I just got a text message from another state employee saying the power is out in Juneau right now. And so I think, Mackenzie, you can expect a follow-up to your question from Mr. Duncan when we get the lights back on in Juneau. I might be able to call on the telephone, but he's not going to be able to log into this thing.
Okay, not a problem. And we have time, before the December meeting, so.
We do. Maura, do you have any comments or say about this? Or
Mr. Chairman, I do. Thank you. So obviously, this is a very complex issue, as was mentioned by some of the testimony we heard this afternoon. There's a lot of history associated with it. Certainly the Board of Fisheries received Carla's briefing and her report during our work session next month. The presentation that Doug gave this afternoon I think was incredibly helpful, but I would like to spend some more time with the materials from your October meeting. That's my intention, and I just would like to also add that I appreciate the time taken by the testifiers to share their comments and perspectives, and we'll take that under advisement, and we'll be in touch.
Great. I think one of the issues that was touched on a little bit in the public comment and in the document is, that the North Pacific Fishery Management Council was informed by our general counsel that their interpretation of Magnuson-Stevens is that we don't manage fisheries into the watershed. We only manage in the EEZ, and the position of UCEDA is that we should manage into the river. And that particular conflict can't really easily be resolved at final action because we have our marching orders from the federal lawyers regarding that. And so the analysis is really focused on that middle area of Cook Inlet. We don't have the latitude to adjust that. We're really bound by the analysis to make our decisions. And so I guess that's the advice that I could provide you in reviewing the analysis and the comments is we really can only use the materials presented to us in an analysis to make a decision in the future. And that's sort of where we're at with this. That might be helpful for you to bring back to the other board members when you do comment back and look at it, that we can only use what's in the analysis to guide our decisions, not necessarily comments that don't relate. I had a question from David.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to let Ms. Mitchell know that Doug Duncan is on the phone, and he's not listed on the participants, but he can answer your question if you want to raise it. So, Doug, did you hear the question?
Hello, do you have me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I get the question repeated, please? And also, I don't have a laptop or a computer in front of me, so I might, information limited, but I'll do my best.
Kenzie, you want to give it a try?
Yep. Thank you, Doug. My question was just to kind of have you maybe clearly and concisely lay out the changes in the level of involvement that the state would have under Alternative 2 in comparison to its past participation and what it's been doing.
So level of participation, do you mean like regarding management activities or just generally? Should I try and take a stab at it?
Yeah, more specifically, just the time and resources that would be demanded on the state that's different than what's been historically there.
Sure, that's helpful. So under Alternative 2, the state is going to play a fairly substantial role in the annual council process for this stock, given that they have most of the relevant expertise as well as the fishery management infrastructure. So there would be involvement by the state at both the pre and post-season meetings where they the work of the salmon plan team. Probably going to be heavily made up of a lot of state participants, in addition to federal scientists, and of course, there'll likely be several meetings a year dedicated to that. Then certainly any additional requirements through exercise of the delegated management authority that would be required of the state would also result in additional costs and burden to the state of Alaska.
Did we lose him, or is he done? You're still with us?
I think that okay. That mostly concludes my statement.
Excuse me. Does that helpful, Mackenzie?
Yeah, and I'll take some time to review public comments and ask additional questions at another time.
Okay, terrific.
I would in the analysis, both for the October meeting and the one that will be posted next week, under the description of Alternative 2, there's the annual process is pretty comprehensively laid out, so that probably provide you some more information on that point.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Bless you. Mute your microphone. Anyone else? Any other questions or comments? Well, I really wanted to thank Doug and the staff for putting together the presentation, and the folks from the Board of Fish, Glenn and Dave from the council, putting the meeting together, and the two of you for showing up. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have another one in the future. And I think communicating back and forth between these entities is a fairly important aspect of making sure we get things right. So I really appreciate your time and the effort to put this together, and we'll look forward to hearing from you between now and December.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Is there anything else, Dave, Glenn, or are we adjourned?
Nothing here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everybody.